I'm excited to be here this morning. We're going to talk about a lot of scripture this morning and how it relates to your health. We're going to cover the top 10 foods in their entirety this morning that you should never eat. Plus, this evening, we've got a whole bunch of very good topics to cover for you. Plus, for every person who comes back this evening, I'm going to give them a report on how to avoid cancer. This is going to be absolutely free. You're getting a written report that I have written on how to avoid cancer, the keys to staying cancer-free, and natural alternatives to treat cancer. Will be given to everyone who comes here tonight for free. Plus, we're going to be talking about the facts, fads, and fallacies of health and nutrition. We're going to be talking about rheumatoid arthritis tonight, the 5 secrets of weight loss and melting cellulite. How many would like to have your cellulite, ladies, melted? We're going to talk about vegetarian diets, which are the most important thing, natural stress reducers. We're going to go into detail on thyroid conditions, asthma conditions, about an aspirin a day, if it's good or bad. A lot of really good topics that we're going to talk about tonight. Plus, we're going to tell you the top 10 ways to maximize and increase your energy levels tonight. But this morning, we're going to be covering the top 10 foods never to eat, along with detailed scripture on what we should and shouldn't do as far as what the Bible tells us. Let me tell you an interesting story. Dr. Mark Rutland, president of Southeastern College, asked us to come to a play that the college had sponsored several weeks ago. And before the play started, he got up and he told the story of a young man who was on a subway. And he was riding on the subway in the subway car, and a nun walked in and sat beside him. And she was completely dressed in her habit, completely decked out in the garb of the nuns as far as the Catholic faith. And it was kind of interesting because the man looked at the nun and said, "You know, all my life, I've wanted to kiss a nun on the cheek." And the nun looked at him and she goes, "Well, that's not appropriate." He goes, "But that's something that I've always wanted to do because I love what you guys do." And the nun says, "I'll let you kiss me on the cheek under 2 conditions. Number 1, that you're Catholic, and number 2, that you're married." He goes, "Absolutely, I'm a Catholic and I'm married." So he kisses her on the cheek. And then he starts laughing. He goes, "I've got a confession to make to you. I'm not a Catholic, I'm Protestant, and I'm not married." And she says, "I have a confession for you. I'm going to a costume party, and my name is George." So things are not always as they appear. And so we're going to talk about that today. And what we're going to talk about today is how you can increase your energy levels, feel great, look great, and avoid a lot of different types of diseases. In fact, I want you to turn with me to Acts. Acts chapter 17, verse 16. This is Paul while he was in Athens. I love the New Testament. I just did another in-depth study of the book of Acts the last few weeks, and I was looking for verses that we could use for this service. Now, you guys have heard me talk about Saul of Tarsus becoming the great apostle Paul in another service we did here several months ago, and he's, to me, one of the heroes of the New Testament. He's wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, an amazing, amazing person. And he goes on to say here in Acts chapter 17, verse 16, "While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as the marketplace, day by day with those who happened to be there." Now, the word I want you to cue in on is reasoned. He didn't go in there and chew them out. He didn't go in there and try to tell them the truth of life. He went in and reasoned with them, trying to discuss with him. And that's what this service is going to be about today. It's going to be, let us reason together. We're going to discuss this morning why the U.S. is leading the world when it comes to heart disease, to diabetes, and to cancer. We're going to tell you why the leading cause of death in children, other than accidents, is cancer. We're going to tell you why we have over 5 million children using drugs like Ritalin and natural alternatives. And we're going to go into depth as to why people think they're living longer in this country, but the aging process is not something that's very beneficial to most people. How many of you realize that they're telling us now we're living longer in the United States? And indeed, statistically, we do have a little bit longer lifespan than we had several years ago. But the reality is we've aborted about 35 million babies in this country in the last 35 years. Now, remember, the U.S. has the highest infant death rate of any industrialized nation. A lot of the babies that would have been born would have died. Are you with me? And that automatically skews down the statistics as far as age and longevity. In other words, if you kill a bunch of the babies that would have died anyhow from natural causes, it makes us look like we're living longer. Does that make sense to anybody? That's what we're doing. In addition to that, we are keeping people alive longer now in nursing homes by drugs. And it was just interesting. I was talking to a staff member just a few moments ago before we came up to the platform, and she was told by her physician, your father's dying. Would you like me to keep him alive for 3 or 4 months longer using drug intervention or just allow him to go peacefully? And, you know, the sad part about that is that's what's going on in a lot of the hospitals and nursing homes. A lot of the nursing homes are being given government subsidies for the amount of patients they have in there, and they keep people's life extended even though the people don't even know they're there anymore. How many of you are aware of that? And, you know, I don't believe in euthanasia. I don't believe in any of that. But what I believe is this, that we as adults, as Americans, and as Christians should realize that our health is our most valuable asset. God gave us His Word on it, gave us complete principles to follow in the Bible concerning health and nutrition. And that's why we're here this morning, and that's what we're going to teach you this morning out of the Word of God, because I don't want you to suffer the curses of the damned. You understand what I'm saying? In Deuteronomy, it tells you that if you're under the law and under the curse of the law, that you have all of these long and lingering diseases and cancers and all these things that are coming upon you. Well, why is that happening to Christians and the believers? It shouldn't be happening to us. And the reality is, it's because of our choices that we're making on a daily basis that's causing us to have a lot of these health problems. So let's go to Acts chapter 24, verse 14. This again is Paul. Acts chapter 24, verse 14. Paul says, he's talking now, he's actually the trial before Felix, and he goes, however, I admit that I worship the God of our fathers as a follower of the way which they call a sect. I believe everything that agrees with the law and that is written in the prophets. Now, let me share something with you very quickly. I believe that we can eat whatever we want to eat, and if we're born-again Christians, that we're getting to heaven. I don't want you to think that I'm trying to put us back under the law and saying if you don't do this and don't do that, you're not going to go to heaven. It's not true. But here's what I am telling you. If you eat foods the Bible tells you not to eat, if you do things the Bible tells you not to do, it's going to cost you. Does that make sense? And you're going to have problems. And see, people need to understand that. We all need to understand that when we start making choices that affect us from a negative standpoint that are against the Word of God, it causes us health problems, life problems, relationship problems, money problems. God gave us a complete textbook of what to follow. So what Paul is saying, look, I believe in everything the Word says, and I'm being on trial today because I basically am saying some things that they don't want to hear. That's what happened with Felix because he's talking about Christ. Now, let's turn to Acts chapter 10. This is Peter's vision. A lot of people say, well, the Bible says that, we can eat any unclean meat we want to eat because in Peter's vision, it says that. That's not at all what it says, but let's look at it. Acts chapter 10, verse 9. About noon the following day, as they were approaching the city, Peter went up to the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven open and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles of the earth and birds of the air. Then a voice told him, Peter, get up, kill and eat. Surely not I, Lord, Peter replied. I have never eaten anything impure or unclean. Now remember, Peter's telling the Spirit, not I, Lord, I've never eaten anything impure or unclean. Scholars say that this vision was given to Peter anywhere from 10 to 15 years after the ascension of Christ. So that means for the last 10 or 15 years, he's been following the dietary protocol in the Bible. Is that correct? Everybody agree with me on that? Okay, so he says, surely not I, Lord. And then it goes on to say, the voice spoke to him a second time, do not call anything impure that God has made clean. This happened 3 times. And in verse 17, Peter says, while Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, verse 19, while Peter was still thinking about the vision, and in verse 28, he interprets the vision. He said to them, you are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate with a Gentile or to visit him, but God has shown me that I should not call any man impure or unclean. It doesn't say animals, it doesn't say pigs, it doesn't say anything, it says man. Are you with me? Now, a lot of you are looking at me kind of funny that you've never heard this before, but that's what it says. And see, what we've done is we stop there at the beginning of Acts chapter 10, and we basically say, hey, wait a minute, that means we can eat everything we want to eat now, and it's okay with God. Well, God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, am I right? He doesn't change. I mean, if he tells you not to do something in the Old Testament, it's because you're not supposed to do it. And you can't try to find ways to justify that. And that's what he's teaching you in this word. Now also, let's turn to Acts chapter 15. And I know I'm going into a lot of depth on the scriptures, but I'm on a Sunday morning service, and I wanted to do this morning. Acts chapter 15, verse 19. This is what he tells us to do. It is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles returning to God. Instead, we should write to them, telling them to abstain from foods polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, and from the meat of strangled animals, and from blood. For Moses has been preached in every city from the earliest times, and is read in the synagogues on every Sabbath. What he's saying here is the teachings of Moses are going to be taught in the churches every single Sabbath, so they'll hear the entire teaching, but let's not make it difficult for them by telling them they have to have all kinds of things like circumcision done to become Christians. And so what the reality is this: God gives us 4 things that as New Testament believers that he wants us to do. Now, there are other things he basically tells us to do in the Old Testament. They're not required of us, but doesn't it seem strange to anybody but me that 3 of the 4 things that we're required to do are diet-related? Think about that for a second. Now, why would God do that? Well, God knows the importance of what we eat and how it affects our body. See, you know, it's interesting to me. I just read this magazine the other day. It was a National Geographic, and it says that basically the front cover has the evolution theory of Darwin been disproven. Has anybody see that article? It just came out. And you know, it's interesting because the world, in its lack of wisdom, is trying to find every way to justify and try to prove there's not a God. How many of you are aware of that? Because you see, if they can try and believe there's not a God, then they can basically justify anything they do. Because if there's no God, that means there's no judgment. That means there's no heaven. That means there's no hell. That means they can do whatever they want to do, sin as much as they want to sin, live as much as they want to in sin, do anything they want to do, and there is no moral recourse, and God doesn't care because there is no God. Now, let me share something with you, and I wasn't planning on doing this morning, but I feel led to. Years ago, when I was in school at Florida State University, it was kind of interesting to me because I was taking a class in genetics, and I asked one of the professors there about the theory of evolution. Now, I was unsaved at this time. I wasn't even born again. And he finally said, well, you know, it's interesting you would ask me that. He goes, I did my doctoral thesis on the theoretical probability of evolution. I thought, whoa, bright person to ask. And I said, well, what did you find out from a mathematical probability as far as us evolving from the slime? And he goes, it's mathematically impossible. It couldn't have happened. And I said, wait a minute, you're telling me that you don't believe that happened that way? He says, couldn't happen statistically, it's impossible. And he said this in front of an entire classroom, like 200 students. The following semester, he was terminated. Now, I find that fascinating. You see, that flew in direct conflict to what they were teaching in the school. Now, let me share something with you about physics. If I take this glass of water and I pour it out, is it going to go down or is it going to go up? Because down follows the law of gravity and it follows the least path of resistance. Am I right? If I step off the platform here, does it matter that I don't believe in the law of gravity if I tell you that I don't? No, I'm going to go down. Am I right? What's the name of the service today? Let us reason together. We're reasoning now. So here's the point. If I take an automobile and I put it out in a field in the rain and the sludge and the mud and everywhere else, in 30 years, is that car going to be in better or worse shape than it was when I put it out there? Because here's why. In nature, least paths of resistance is followed. Are you with me? In other words, why would an amoeba want to become a human being? Are we more complex or less complex than an amoeba? And see, all the experiments that they've done now trying to prove how amino acids or proteins are formed with nitrogen and electricity, with lightning, they've all failed. They can't duplicate, quote, creation. And so in their futility and in their frustration, they tell us that we evolved, but yet they can't prove it. And then they tell us, well, there's a missing link. Well, there's a reason there's a missing link. It doesn't exist. And see, so when you start studying science, you start looking at what's going on in science, you start to realize that a lot of the people who are involved in scientific protocol are caught up in a box. They've been told what to believe, they've been told what to do, they've been told how to act. Perfect example. This new drug problem that we have now with Celebrex. The manufacturers of this drug knew 6 years ago that it would increase the risks of heart disease and stroke. But yet their researchers asked specific questions in such a way so that their researchers wouldn't find out that it was doing this, in spite of the fact that outside research showed that it did. How many of you realize that drugs, when they're put on the market within 5 years, that 50% of them either have to have their labels changed or they have to be removed off the market? I mean, it's unbelievable. How about fen-phen? How about thialamide? The list goes on and on and on. How about back in the 50s when they routinely gave women DES or diethylstilbestrol to help reduce the risk of miscarriages? And now we have an entire generation of young boys or older men now who have cancer of the testicles, women who have cancer of the ovaries directly because their mothers were given DES. And see, these drugs that we take and we put into our bodies have side effects. How many of you would like to learn how to have tremendous energy, feel absolutely wonderful every day of your life, and not have to take drugs? That's what we're here to tell you this morning, because there's natural things that you can do on a regular basis to feel absolutely wonderful. Let's turn to Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17. Now, when the Bible was originally written, how many of you realize there weren't chapters and verses? Okay, they were put in here to make it easier to find stuff. So it kind of goes as a complete letter. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, 17. Therefore, come ye out from among them and be ye separate, touch no unclean thing, and I will receive you. And that goes right back, by the way, if you look at the reference, that goes right back to Leviticus, as far as unclean items, and also on Isaiah. And I'll receive you, and I'll be a father to you, and I'll be sons, you'll be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord. Since we have these promises, dear God, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit. So again, it's God's telling us, look, certain things avoid that contaminate the body, certain things avoid contaminate the spirit. We need to avoid them. Now, we go back to chapter 11 in Leviticus, but I'll let you do that at a later date. But mark that down, chapter 11 in Leviticus, and it tells you what to eat and what not to eat. But then I want you to go to Matthew, chapter 5, verse 17. This is Christ talking. Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, not heaven and earth will disappear, not the smallest letter nor the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't say you're not going to get into heaven, be considered least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. See, Jesus himself knew that the scriptures could not be broken and that God was the same yesterday, today, and forever. Does that make sense? So when he tells you to do something in the Old Testament, it's something we should be obedient to in the New Testament, not because of salvation, but because this is his will for us. And let's turn one more verse to Isaiah chapter 65 and chapter 66. Isaiah chapter 65, God was pretty upset. He goes, I revealed myself, in verse 1, I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me, and I was found by those who did not seek me. To a nation did not call on my name, I said, here am I, here am I. All day long I've held out my hands to an obstinate people. It goes on to say, who eat the flesh of pigs and whose pots hold the broth of unclean meat. Such people are a smoke in my nostril and a fire that keeps burning all day. Now, how many of you know that God got pretty upset in the Old Testament? Let me see your hands. I mean, if you don't believe that, read some of the stuff in Genesis and Exodus and some of the things that happened to the children of Israel as they left the Promised Land. And he goes on to say in Isaiah chapter 66, those who consecrate and purify themselves to go into the gardens, following the one in the midst of those who eat the flesh of pigs and rats and other abominable things, they will meet their end together, declareth the Lord. So how many of you can honestly say that God really doesn't want us eating pigs or rats? Are we with me? So are we reasoning here together? I mean, that's what it says. Now, real quick, let's turn to 1 John, back in the New Testament. Having our walk through the Bible this morning. 1 John chapter 2, verse 6 says, whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. I find that pretty simple. Did Jesus eat pork products? Oh, that shook a lot of you up. You didn't know what to say when I asked you that. One more time. Did Jesus eat pork? Okay. Now remember, Jesus fulfilled the law. In him was found no sin. Was it sin for a Jewish person to eat pork? Yes or no? Yes. So did Jesus eat pork? So it's telling us to walk as Jesus walked. Doesn't it? Okay, just thought I'd ask you that. You guys are all looking at me like, oh, man. 1 John chapter 3, verse 21. Dear friends, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence before God, and we receive from him anything we ask. Why? Because we obey his commands, and we do what pleases him. Now, I've already read to you the chapters in Isaiah, which God gets really upset about eating unclean meat. Am I right? Does that please God? No. That's what we're here to talk to you about this morning. We're here to tell you there are certain things that you can do to increase your vitality, increase your stamina, feel great every single day of your life. But there are other things, if you do these things, will cost you. Now, it doesn't make any difference whether you believe it or not. It's like if I don't believe in the law of gravity, it doesn't make any difference. There are certain things, certain behaviors, for instance, if you go out with a credit card and you charge, and don't think about the end of the month, is it going to cost you? At the end of the month, the bill's going to come due. That's what's happening to us in this country. At the end of our lives, towards the end of our middle of our lives, the bill comes due. We think we can eat all we want to eat all the junk we want to eat, do anything we want to do, and nothing is going to be affected by our behavior. It's simply not true. There are certain foods, if we eat them, increase the risks of cancer. We know that. There are certain foods, if we eat them, cause cancer. We know that. And we're going to talk about this morning. Now, the first food, how many of you have a sheet of paper and pencil? I want you to wave the pencil. I want you to write this down for me. The first food is biblically based that we tell you never to eat. These are the top 10 foods never to eat. Number one, you never eat high-fat luncheon meats. I include bacon, sausage, ham, pepperoni, and hot dogs in that category, including all pork products. Now, it's interesting because I love pork ribs. Now, you probably never thought you'd hear me say something like that from the platform. I tell you, there's a place where I live in Central Florida. It's called Peebles Barbecue. And they have the best pork ribs that I have ever eaten. And I used to love to go to Peebles Barbecue. And I can honestly say to you that sometimes I miss not being able to eat pork ribs when I drive by and I smell the pork ribs. Now you think, I can't believe it. I know it's hard for me to believe that I'm saying this to you, I know. But it's true. But I don't eat them. And here's why. When I was 27 years old, right out of graduate school from Florida State, I came down with heart disease. And I almost died. Now, that'll get your attention. And a friend of mine shared with me what I shared with you this morning about scriptural nutrition, not to put me under the law, but to teach me the principles that God gave us in the Old Testament on how to live well and healthy all the days of our life. When I changed my diet, returned back to the scriptures, started doing more and more research in the biochemistry and the other things of how it affected the body, I realized that every single thing the Bible tells us to do is correct. And that doesn't just include nutrition, it's everything the Bible tells us to do. See, God so loved us that he wouldn't have put us here on this earth and not given us an owner's manual. See, if you don't change your oil in your car on a regular basis, that car's going to break down. If you don't take care of what God's given you and provide annual maintenance, it's going to break down. The same thing is true with the body. Your body needs specific nutrients in specific concentrations. Here's the problem. About 100 and some odd years ago, we had what we call the Industrial Revolution in this country. And we started processing and milling our grains and taking the nutrients out of them. We started processing and milling our foods. We started not rotating crops any longer. We started eating foods that were denatured. And so what happened is our health has gradually diminished as we've gotten older in this country, which I find fascinating. My grandfather on my mother's side, his name was Bauerichter, B-A-U-R-I-C-H-T-E-R, Carl Bauerichter. Monster of a man, strong, I mean amazing. Lived to be 86 years old, walked every day, it was amazing. Then he had a stroke and he died, like a couple of months later. My mom now, she's 88 years old, and she's in a nursing home. Really doesn't know where she is anymore. Doesn't know who we are anymore. And you think, okay, what happened? How can one generation to the next generation deteriorate that much? Just a couple of years in age difference. Well, here's the reality. Every generation in this country is becoming progressively sicker. Because every generation is getting less and less of those essential nutrients that we talked about that your body has to have in order to maintain health. Let me give you another story. Now, if you're a medical professional and you're watching us on TV this morning, or if you're here in the room, I'm certainly not talking about you because you haven't gotten up and left yet, okay? You'll get that in a minute. But here's the reality. About 10% of the medical doctors that are available today, by my own count, are health and nutrition related. About 10%. They're really, really good physicians. About 90%, they tend to follow standard medical protocol. And they really don't want to think outside of the box because of litigation problems. They're afraid they're going to get sued if they don't follow standard medical procedure. Or they basically don't really want to mess with it because when you talk to people about diet and health, you can't do it in 2 or 3 minutes. And the average life expectancy of a medical doctor, according to the journal, their own journal, is about 57 years. So they don't live that long anyhow, and they're under a lot of stress. So I'm not picking on the 10% that are really health conscious, and I'm not really picking on the other 90% because they've kind of gotten stuck into a system that they probably don't want to be in anyhow with all the malpractice litigation, and a lot of the laws that were being passed, especially in the state of Florida this past time, were about malpractice fees and how much money a person could get. But here's what's interesting. My mom is on, roughly, she's been on as many as a dozen prescription drugs at one time. They've given her a complete drug cocktail in such a way that they basically messed up her brain to a point with her psychotropic drugs that they've given her that, I've watched her deteriorate in the last couple of years in the nursing home. And the other day I was looking at her medical protocol, and the reason, by the way, that I haven't tried to change this is I have a sister who's also a medical doctor. And she's pretty much sick all the time, my sister, and she's one of those 90%ers. I'm not trying to pick on her. She's just one of the 9%ers. Now, she's brilliant. She's probably the smartest human being I've ever met. She's got an MD degree, and she has a doctorate from Harvard. Amazing person. Amazing person. I think, what's the highest you can get on an SAT? Yeah, she got like 1595 or something on the SATs. I mean, amazing. Okay? But here's the problem. She's been placed in a box. This is what she's been trained to think in, and this is where she is. So I looked at my mother's nutritional protocol and her medical protocol, and they had her on 0 vitamins. Not even a multiple. Nothing. And, she, in the nursing home food, how many can agree with me? It's not very good. And so I saw this, and I thought, this is crazy, because when she had gone in, I had asked her to be on B vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin E, a multiple. And I thought, what happened? And they said, well, her doctor took her off the vitamins. I said, okay. So I said, can you please have her doctor call me? And she goes, absolutely, talking to the administrative staff. So the doctor called me up and said, this is Dr. So-and-so. I'm your mother's caring physician. I said, yeah, I want you to do me a favor. My mom needs to be back on her vitamins. She's really deteriorating. And she goes, what do you want her to be on? I said, a multiple B, C, and some E. Nothing extensive. And you guys who know me, that's not very much. And she goes, I'm not going to do that. Now listen to what she said to me. She said, why should I prescribe drugs for your mother that she does not need? And I said, you're telling me that vitamins are drugs. I will not give her any medication that she does not require. And I said, now wait a minute. I said, this doesn't make sense to me. You know she doesn't eat right. You know the nursing home food isn't very healthy. But you won't even put her on a multiple vitamin. No, because she's not showing any deficiencies to symptoms. She doesn't have scurvy, so we're not going to put her on vitamin C. And I thought, I'm just beating my head on the wall. And I said to her, I said, well, ma'am, I said, let me explain something to you. I said, God's really blessed me. I said, I feel humbled by what I'm going to tell you. I said, but I've spoken to 1 million people at live seminars. I've been featured on over 5,000 radio and TV talk shows. I've written best-selling books. I'm internationally known as a health and fitness expert. And her response to me was, I don't care what you know. I don't care what you've written. I'm not putting your mom on vitamins. I don't care what you say. True story is, God is my witness. I'm telling you the truth. And I said to her, I said, ma'am, I'm going to say something to you that I've never said to another medical professional, but I'm going to say it to you anyhow. You are an educated idiot. I said, the fact that you can't see through this and make some decisions here for my mother is unbelievable to me. And of course, the conversation abruptly came to a close. But the point was, I'm telling you this right now, your health is not your doctor's responsibility. That was the point of that whole story. Your health is not your wife's or your husband or your pastor's. It's not even my responsibility. It's your own responsibility. I heard an old Baptist preacher one time. He said it so succinctly, every pot sits on its own bottom. And everybody in here, your health is your own responsibility. And that's the point of me being here today. I want you to take responsibility for your health. Remember, the University of Southern California did a study a couple of years ago, and they found that children who eat 3 hot dogs a week have 9 times the risk of leukemia versus children who not. 3 hot dogs a week, 12 hot dogs a month, 9 times the risk of leukemia. Now, if you know that statistic now, as I've told you this morning, doesn't it make sense? Let us reason together. Don't give your children hot dogs. Doesn't that make sense? And the other thing is, people say, well, let's use turkey hot dogs. Okay, if you want to use a turkey hot dog, that's up to you, but make sure it doesn't contain, write this down, sodium nitrite. It is one of the most reactive carcinogens known to man. It's the coloring agent they use in luncheon meats, sodium nitrite. It's been linked to colon and rectal cancer and all other types of ailments in the body. Don't use it. It's very, very important. In addition to that, in many cases, there's actually a certain percentage of rat or rodent hair in sausage meats. Now, some of you have seen this rat already, other ones you haven't. Now, here's the reality. In some cases, some of this rat hair gets into luncheon meats, and we eat it. So here's the question I have for you. Let us reason together. How in the world does rat hair get in there to start with? Rats do not get haircuts. In some cases, they fall into the grinding vats, kicking and screaming, and we consume the entire rat. Now, I said this a few years ago at a seminar in Denver, and I promptly received a letter from the USDA. And they said, we do not allow any percentages of rat hair in our products, because you always hear they allow a certain percentage of rat hair. They said, when we find that a rat gets into the product, we like have the plant sterilized, closed, and clean. Now, notice they never denied that it happens. They said, but here's our protocol, and we don't allow rat hair in our food. Now, the reality is this. What does God tell you in Isaiah? Don't eat pork, don't eat rats. That simple. Number 2 to stay away from is NutraSweet, aspartame, or equal diet sodas. I cannot tell you the horror stories that I have personally seen by the use of artificial sweeteners. Stay away from these products. The best alternative to use is stevia. You can get it in liquid or in granulated forms. NutraSweet's been linked to brain tumors, brain cancer, seizures, headaches, optic nerve degradation, blindness. The list goes on and on and on. Here's what happens. Remember I mentioned that nitrite to you just a second ago? When you combine NutraSweet and nitrites together, according to the research that was done by Dr. John Olney at Washington University at the St. Louis Medical Center, when you combine these nutrients or chemicals together, what you do is you form what's called a diketopiperazine in neurochemistry. That breaks down to form what's called a nitrosourea. Now listen to me. That's kind of technical, but here's the point. Nitrosoureas are the most effective agent known to man for producing malignant brain tumors in laboratory animals. So every time you eat a pepperoni pizza and a diet soda, you potentially give yourself an injection of nitrosoureas. Have you wondered why so many people are dying of brain cancer? Let us reason together. There are things that we're eating, there are things that we're doing, there are things that we're putting into our body that are causing us tremendous health problems. And if we do not stop doing these things, our health doesn't get better, it simply gets worse. Does that make sense? Let me give you another example. I had a lady come in the office a few years ago. Her name was Barbara, and her husband's name was Bob. It's an interesting story because I was doing a lot of counseling at that time. I was seeing up to 40 patients a day. And I find it fascinating that Bob brought Barbara in. Now, Barbara was having so many health problems that they were affecting every aspect of their marriage. Their health, her energy, everything, their sexual relationship, every part of their marriage was being affected because she was sick all the time. Now, how many of you can honestly say if you have a spouse that's sick all the time, it puts a lot of stress on the marriage? Let me see your hands. It makes it tough. And Barbara was sick all the time. So Bob brought me in and said, Ted, if you cannot help my wife, I'm going to divorce her. And I said, whoa, Bob, whoa. I said, I'm not a marriage counselor. You need to chill out. He goes, I've been to the marriage counselor, it hadn't helped. It's her health. I said, okay, we'll try. She filled out a health questionnaire. She was in her late 20s, 2 kids, about 20 pounds overweight, and told me she was suffering with fatigue, insomnia, sinus trouble, indigestion, heartburn, and constipation. She went on to tell me she had allergies, bleeding gums, headaches, stress, weak muscle tone, that she had a severe problem with PMS, back pain, varicose veins, and she was extremely irritable, nervous, and depressed. Let me ask you another question. If your spouse had all of these symptoms, can you honestly say it'd be pretty difficult to deal with it? especially if your spouse is a man and he's got PMS. That'd be real bad. But by the way, I say that tongue-in-cheek, but the reality is, as men get older and their hormones change, they are now calling it male menopause. And a lot of times it triggers this, what do you call this, middle-age syndrome. The guys go out and want to get remarried, get a new wife, try things differently, and all the other stuff they have to do. And the sad part about it is now, until recently, people haven't realized that also happens to men as they get into their 40s. Now, it's interesting because I know a lot of things happen to you when you age, and a lot of them can be prevented. Like, I'm 49 years old now. My energy is really good still, but it's not as good as when I was 20 years old. But it's still really high. So the reality is the aging process doesn't have to be horrible, but some of the aspects of aging are inevitable. For instance, you may lose a little bit of memory as you get older, but you don't have to become debilitated and not remember anything. Does that make sense? There are specific nutrients that you can take now that really increase your memory skills and allow you to maintain good cognitive function well into your 80s and 90s, sometimes older. But it all depends on the choices that we make when we were younger. So it's interesting with Barbara. So Barbara filled out the health questionnaire for me, and she basically told me she had all of these symptoms and all these diseases. And so I told her, I said, well, we've done some testing on you. We found that you have hypoglycemia. So there are some things that we can do to stabilize your blood sugar, and a lot of these symptoms, which are hypoglycemic related, will simply go away. And her response to me, I'll never forget it, she said, why should I listen to you? Why should I do what you say? I already consider myself to be healthy. And I looked at her and I said, Barbara, I have to ask you another question. How are you defining health? And she said, I don't have heart disease or diabetes or cancer, so I consider myself to be healthy. Now, what Barbara was doing is this. She was defining health as the absence of a major disease. Does that make sense to most of you here? That's what we do in this country in general. In other words, if we're not dying from heart disease or diabetes or cancer, what ends up happening is we think we're healthy. And so Barbara basically just didn't want to listen to anything that I had to say concerning how to correct her problem. You know, you can determine the state of your health by looking at your medicine cabinets. You're going to find anti-cough medicines, decongestants, antacids, inhalers, tranquilizers, aspirin, sedatives, painkillers. I mean, all of these drugs in their place may be okay in moderation or taken every once in a while, but not on a regular basis. Tonight we're going to talk about the dangers of taking too much aspirin. Is aspirin a day really necessary? We're going to talk about the facts, fads, and fallacies of health nutrition. How many of you just saw that big research that was released on vitamin E a few weeks ago or heard about it on the radio or TV? We're going to talk about that in detail tonight. We're going to tell you the truth about the research that was done on that. We're going to give you a lot of really good information about vitamin E and different types of therapies that are available, you know, for heart disease without the use of drugs. Interesting thing, one of the things they do now with heart disease, they use statin drugs to lower cholesterol. How many of you know what a statin drug is? Like Procore, Zocor, those things. And they don't bother to tell you that one of the common side effects of these drugs is cancer. This is something they don't bother to tell you. You know, it's interesting. I met Pastor Parsley. Some of you don't know the story, so I'll tell you again. About 2 years ago now, he had a TV program in Dallas, Texas. And it was kind of interesting because Pastor Parsley came up to me after he had heard me speak on the TV show and said, I've got to ask you a question. He goes, my cholesterol's like, you know, sky high. You know, can you help me? And to paraphrase this whole conversation, I basically said, ask me something hard. That's easy. And I sent him an email telling him exactly what to do to lower his cholesterol, gave him one of my books. And about 4 or 5 months later, he called me up and said, my cholesterol has gone from like over 500 down to 160. I've lost 35 pounds. I've dropped 9 inches in my waist. And I feel absolutely wonderful. And a lot of you have asked me, what in the world did you tell Pastor Parsley about cholesterol that made it that easy? I'm going to tell you tonight. I am. We're going to talk about diabetes. I'm going to tell you exactly what you can do for adult onset diabetes, how the University of Kentucky and some of these other organizations have been able to get 85% of the people that are taking insulin off insulin. We're going to cover all that tonight in detail. So I want you to bring your paper and pencil. We're going to talk about heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, and I'm giving you the article for free on cancer that I've written tonight. Now, number 3 we need to stay away from are margarine products, hydrogenated oils, trans fatty acid. You know what's interesting? Now the labels are starting to say no trans fats in food, or how much trans fats. And you know, I've been telling people that for 20 years, and I kind of consider it a personal victory that after 5,000 radio and TV talk shows, and now finally the government's gotten the hint that maybe hydrogenated oils and trans fats are bad for you. And when the USDA was asked to give a daily allowable percentage, when they told the manufacturers, you know what they said? They said, trans fats are so poisonous, we can't give you a daily allowable percentage because they're so poisonous. Isn't that amazing? But yet now the manufacturers have begun to, remember what started all this though? It wasn't probably me as much as it was the Oreo cookies lawsuit. Remember last year? 2 years ago, when they were going to sue the makers of Oreo because they contained trans fats and they were causing the increased risks of heart disease? Because see, what margarine does, or hydrogenated oils or trans fats, what they do is they block the LDL receptor sites, increasing the LDL cholesterol, which means the bad cholesterol goes up, the good cholesterol goes down. It increases the risk of breast cancer substantially in women and increases the risks of infertility and impotency in men. That's just the start, and it does all kinds of other things to the system. These are synthetic fats. They're like Crisco. Shortening. Take a tub of shortening, ladies, if you still have it at home. Pull the lid off of it. Sit it in your garage. It can sit there 5, 10, 15 years. Nothing eats it. It doesn't go bad. Bugs will crawl in it and get stuck in it, but they just die in it. I mean, think about this. If you're cooking something, ladies, and you've got a really nice silk outfit on, you come home from church, and you're cooking with Crisco, and you splatter Crisco on your silk clothes, what do you do with your clothes? You throw them away. You don't get it out. If you can't get it out of your clothes, how are you supposed to get it out of your arteries? See, what we eat becomes part of us. Use olive oil. We're going to give you natural alternatives tonight. But let me give you some info. Let me read you a couple letters real quick. This is from Scott. Dear Dr. Brower, for over 3 years I've been on medication for high blood pressure and diabetes. I weighed 248 pounds. I had little or no energy, and I was sick of being ill. I heard you on a radio talk show. I ordered your books and tapes. I listened to the tape series and took action immediately. I boxed till my cupboards were bare, then I donated the food to a local church. I guess he didn't like the church. Within the first week, I noticed a change in my weight. By the end of the first month, I was riding my bicycle 2 miles each way to work and walking for an hour at night. I began to feel different. I worked with my personal physician in slowly eliminating or reducing my medication dosage. Very important. If you're on prescription drugs, don't take yourself off prescription drugs. Work with your physician. If your physician doesn't want to find natural alternatives, I have advice for you. Get another physician. By March 1st, I was off all medication. I'm now at 224 pounds. I'm still losing. I eat plenty. I even mow the lawn with a lawnmower without an engine. Along with my activities of bike riding, walking, and more, I have energy to spare. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Scott. Medication free. This is a letter that came in from Judy. I'm writing you for 2 reasons. I want to thank you for your Eat, Drink, and Be Healthy program and your cookbook. I've been extremely hypoglycemic my entire adult life. I went on your program to break my addiction to sugar. How many of you realize sugar can be addictive? How many of you say that chocolate bar is calling you? We're going to talk about chocolate tonight. I'll tell you how much you can eat safely tonight. I was eating at least 3 candy bars before 8:30 a.m. And that was just to get started. The result has been a total break in my desire for sweets. I've lost 20 pounds in 8 weeks. I continue to see weight loss, although I feel so good and I have so much energy. It's the most painless experience I've ever enjoyed. I'm never hungry. My emotional swings are gone. And I'm stable and I'm balanced for the first time in years. Thank you for your great program. This is the first time I've been able to so quickly get to my God-given normal size and so easily maintain my ideal weight and sugar balance with such little effort. I'm here to tell you, you can feel good, you can look good, you can have tremendous energy. Your own pastor has proven that using our program. Number 4, shellfish products, lobster, shrimp, oyster, prawns, scallops, crabs, clams. Wait a minute. Fins and scales, go back to Leviticus. It tells you not to eat those things. Their pots hold the broth of unclean meat. Okay, now if you saw a lobster running across the floor in your kitchen at night, you wouldn't think much of eating it, would you? Well, a lobster is an arthropod, a cockroach is an arthropod. All a lobster is a giant cockroach. I mean, enough said. I mean, we don't have to go any further with that. And God knew that in His Word. That's why He told it to you. And at $20 a pound, what's the point of that? Number 5, junk food category. Twinkies and ding-dongs and cupcakes. You know, I saw a Twinkie at a health food show years ago that had been on display for 15 years. For real, 15 years. It was still squishy. Even God's bacteria had more sense than to try to eat this thing. But yet we're feeding it to our children every day in their lunch pails, and we're wondering why the kids are staying sick all the time. We're wondering why they're having ear infections all the time. We're wondering why they're having asthma problems. We're going to talk about asthma in children tonight, what can be done with asthma. A lot of things we're going to talk about tonight. And the reality is now we've got millions of children taking the drug Ritalin. You know, Ritalin's a psychotropic drug. You know, it is now the designer, it's not a designer drug, but it's now the drug of choice in college campuses. for studying and to concentrate. See, with adults, it gives them more energy. With kids, it makes them kind of slow down. And the reality is they don't know what the long-term effects are going to be on these children who are started on psychotropic drugs like Ritalin when they're 2 and 3 years old. A 3-year-old child, newsflash, is supposed to be a little hyper. I mean, why do we want to drug the child into a stupor when they're 2 and 3 years old? I mean, I'm not talking about bouncing off the walls hyper, but they're supposed to be curious. And you put them into a zombie state, what does that do to their brain over a period of years? And so I'm not diametrically opposed to the use of these types of drugs on children, but what I'm saying is this: unless a child is exhibiting bizarre behavioral patterns like they want to burn the school down or something, you don't need to try to tone them down that much. I remember a few months ago I had a consultation with a lady. It was interesting. I was doing a favor for a TV show, for an owner of a TV show, and they asked me to have this lady call me up, and the child was like 6 years old, and they wanted to put the child on Ritalin. So I gave her all these natural alternatives to the use of Ritalin. And her response was, well, that would take effort on my part. I'm not willing to do that. And she got downright indignant with me and got mad. This conversation basically ended because she did not want to do what she needed to do as a parent to correct the problems. She wanted it all to be done by a pill that wasn't going to affect cognitive or brain development. That's impossible. You've got to make healthier choices for your children. So we'll talk about natural alternatives to the use of Ritalin tonight. Number 6, Olean, Olester, the new fake fat that came out of Procter & Gamble several years ago. Stay away from it. Number 7, chlorine and fluoride in the water supply. Always make sure you drink filtered or bottled water. Reverse osmosis, steam distilled water are the best. I'll tell you tonight which ones and what brands to use. Number 8, high-fat dairy. So you didn't think I was going to finish this top 10 list, did you? You thought I was not going to tell you the whole 10. Number 8, high-fat dairy products, primarily homogenized, pasteurized products. There are some natural, organic dairy products that I use and our children use are okay. But remember, there are a lot of hormones in milk products, a lot of chemicals in the milk products, and the homogenization process really causes a lot of problems with dairy products. Number 9, and this is a very hard one for me because when I was in graduate school at Florida State, I used to drink 18 cups of it a day. Coffee. Now, let me share something with you. I'm not telling you never to drink coffee. What I'm saying is use coffee as a tool, not as a crutch. How many of you realize that caffeine is a banned substance in Olympic competition? If you're caught with high enough levels of caffeine in your blood, you are disqualified if you are a medal contender. People don't realize that. Caffeine can cause all types of problems, including fibroid tumor formation in the breast tissue, and a lot of researchers believe it increases the risk of breast cancer. So use it in moderation. What I mean by moderation is don't have it in your house. That's moderation. And if you want to occasionally go out and have a cup of coffee because you've got to get up for a meeting or a presentation or you're a little sleepy or you're driving, I don't have a problem with that. But don't get into the habit that I used to be in when I was in college, that I would set my coffee maker on automatic in the morning, and I would tell my roommates, don't speak to me, don't breathe my air, don't get in my space, don't get around me until I've had my 6 cups of coffee. That's how I used to be. So occasionally it's okay. And number 10 are alcohol products. If you're going to use alcohol, do us all a favor and get a designated driver. Unbelievably important that you do that. Because a lot of kids and a lot of adults and a lot of people are losing family members or are being killed every year because of drunk drivers. Now, I've never seen anything good come from alcohol. Are you with me? I've never heard anybody say, my life was a wreck and then I started drinking and everything worked out great. You know, the new trend now in some of these health advocates, even in the Christian community, are saying, drink red wine. I'm telling you, don't drink red wine. There are natural things that you can do to reduce your risk of heart disease without drinking red wine. Now, the reality is, guess who paid for those red wine drinking ads? The alcohol manufacturers. Guess who paid for the research telling you that red wine is good for you? The alcohol manufacturers. And they can skew their studies to make their studies say anything they want them to say by changing how they set up the control. And I'm telling you, from a scientific standpoint, it's very easy to do. So there are all kinds of side effects: pancreatic cancer, liver cancer, cirrhosis liver, osteoporosis, and breast cancer that have been proven clinically to occur with alcohol consumption. So don't buy into this stuff. Little red wine's okay. It's not necessary. We have natural ways of doing it. Now, some people say, well, in Timothy, Paul says, use a little bit of wine. The wine they were using was very, very diluted, like 1/10 the concentrations they use today. It's not what they're selling today on the storeroom shelves. And remember this also, about 10% of the people who start drinking alcohol, they become addicted to alcohol. So why in the world can I sit up here and tell you to start drinking alcohol, and 3 years later you come up and tell me, you know, I was doing great until I listened to you, and all of a sudden I'm an alcoholic and I've lost everything? It doesn't make any sense. Okay? So don't start drinking to try to be healthy. There's all kinds of natural alternatives.